All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is my friend Molly Knefel. Molly is a comedian, a writer, a journalist. She is also the co-host with her brother John of Radio Dispatch, which you can find at theradiodispatch.com. You can also find her on Twitter at Molly Knefel. Molly, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so Molly, you recently wrote a piece at The Nation on the ability of jurors to nullify verdicts and sentencing. A lot of this actually stems from the famous Cecily McMillan case that happened not too long ago. If listeners aren't familiar, do remind them, who is Cecily McMillan and what happened with her trial, essentially.
Right. So Cecily McMillan is an Occupy protester who was charged with felony assault of an officer following an incident in Zuccotti Park on the night of March 17th, 2012, which was the 6-month anniversary of Occupy Wall Street, and people had gathered at the park for celebration to mark the occasion. The gathering resulted in basically another eviction of the park. Dozens and dozens of police officers surrounded the park and very violently removed people from it. During that incredibly violent removal/eviction, there was interaction between Cecily McMillan and a police officer named Grantley Bovell, where basically Officer Bovell alleges that Cecily elbowed him in the face, which there's basically Cecily doesn't contest that. Her defense team didn't contest that she had elbowed him, but her explanation was that he had grabbed her breast from behind, and she reacted instinctively, not realizing that it was a police officer. So she was charged with felony assault. Her defense team argued that it was an accident, basically, and she ended up getting convicted of felony assault by a jury of 12.
And not only that, I mean, like, there was a lot of things even with the trial and the way that the type of evidence that McMillan was allowed to present. The trial itself was, many people kind of have commented that it was pretty much, there was a lot of parts of it that was a sham trial, which a lot of these trials against, when you actually go up against police officers, what you can actually bring in as evidence is limited quite a good deal. But then so she was convicted, and then she was actually sentenced fairly harshly. What was her sentence?
Right. So she was convicted, and after she was convicted. The timeline is basically that, as you said, during the trial there was a lot that was excluded from the trial by the judge and by the prosecution wanted to greatly limit the scope of the trial. They didn't want to include any information about what I said about the violence. The general violence in the park, the amount of violent police behavior that happened in the park that evening, including violence alleged against the very same officer, Bovell, that very same night in a different incident. And so a lot of that, that there was a great deal of information that was excluded from the trial, and so the jury ended up convicting her, and it was, felony assault, and by statute she faced 2 to 7 years in prison. And so there was a time period after she was convicted, but before she was sentenced. And one of the things that the jurors didn't know, one of the many things the jurors didn't know, as they deliberated and when they convicted, is they didn't know what the punishment could be for convicting her. That's something that generally speaking the jurors don't know. It's not supposed to be part of whether they convict or not. They're supposed to convict on the facts of the case, not the law. So they convicted her, and then they found out that she, upon leaving the courthouse, basically, they found out that she faced 2 to 7 years in prison, and many of them, or I should say, one of them told The Guardian that several of the jurors expressed shock and disbelief that it could be that much. And then a few days later, still before sentencing, 9 of the 12 jurors wrote a letter to the Judge Zweibel, petitioning for leniency in the case, basically saying, yes, we convicted her, but we think that a felony conviction is punishment enough. We don't want her to go to prison. We don't want her. We think that she should serve community service and probation, but we ask you, please, for no incarceration.
Right. And then ultimately she ended up serving 90 days and then an actual probation after that, correct, is what and she's since been released, but that's not the main crux of what we're going to get to. But ultimately the judge sentenced her to 90 days, but still the threat of 2 to 7 years was looming over this the entire time. Right.
And it's, who knows exactly why she was only sentenced to 90 days when by statute it could have been 2 to 7 years. But I think that it's fair to say that the jury letter, in addition to a lot of other petitioning to the judge that happened from her professors and from various other people, city council people, was important. But I mean, the jury letter was a very noteworthy thing to have all these jurors say, "Oh my gosh, we didn't realize this was what we were doing. Please don't send her to jail." And that was what got me thinking, like, how interesting that, that here you have a jury with all this power. I mean, the jury, has an incredible amount of power over the defendants that they are judging, and yet they lack so much information about the decisions that they're making.
And so that actually led you to write that jurors they have a lot of power. They actually have some more power, and that's kind of the idea of nullification. And this is really, really interesting, and I never even thought of this at all. So tell us so is this specifically for New York, or does this actually apply to people all around the country?
Right. So nullification is basically, what it means is acquitting somebody of what they're charged with, regardless of the evidence. Meaning, and again, we don't know exactly what was going on in the minds of the Cecily jurors, but just to take it as an example, if they convicted because they thought, well, all of the evidence shows us that we really believe that she's guilty. It is possible in that situation for jurors to say, well, even if we do believe that she is guilty, we don't believe that she should be convicted of a felony for this. So we are going to choose to acquit her regardless of the evidence. And there's better examples. An example of somebody who's charged with a drug violation, who has drugs on them. There's no question. You have the drugs there. In the courtroom, you have the police testifying, you have the medical expert, whatever, and the jury could still say, well, we think that this drug charge, we don't, if we don't want to convict somebody for drugs, so we choose to acquit them. Basically, it's a way for the jury to kind of act to judge the law itself, not not just to be able to judge the defendant, which is what they're charged with, but to actually judge the law, to decide whether or not they want to convict based on the law, not only on the evidence of the case.